And good evening and welcome to Your View with me, JJ Tabane. Tonight, big night here on Your View as we have a dialogue with a range of brains from across our economy and society to tell me what they think of what the minister said. Because last night we also, sort of had some tips, and we want to see whether or not, some of those tips found their way. But before I talk about that and how the budget looked like yesterday, I wanted to talk about this. But you got to give the kudos to Yunus Karim. Hey, the guy is a cutthroat chap, eh? And of course, today the SABC again on the spotlight. The place was in a chaotic and shambolic state. And of course, the CEO, or a pseudo-CEO, I mean, that's all you can call her, under Saudi. Saudi made her become so useless because he was a law unto himself. And the theme is similar, it's growing, it's not even new. That's what Yunus Karim said. Yunus Karim called Saudi, or rather Saudi thought of himself as some kind of interlocutor. We used a big word, eh? Interlocutor. I don't even thought Saudi know a word like that. That's why the whole thing, just the irony didn't befall him. So he says Saudi saw himself as an interlocutor between him and the president. And he said, no, but the president didn't ask me to account to you. And of course, Mukova, even worse, in Saudi, plotted to get her out. The place was run like a spaza shop, man. It was run like a bloody spaza shop. But I've always said, if there is a fall of any minister of communications in the New South Africa, it's been the SABC. Somehow the idea that you are in charge of this big machinery of propaganda goes to the heads of these ministers. From Matsipe Kazaburi, and may her soul rest in peace, to, there was a chap called Padayachi who died overseas. And then there was this Diana Pule who was, concerned about what kind of color shoes she wears. It's a mess, man. When you look at the Ministry of Communication, it's like a portfolio that's just bewitched. And then when you had a good guy like a Yunus Karim, they were just marginalized and told to shut up, and the private sector trying to tell them what to do and so on. I don't know whether we're going to get the place right, but of course it seems like it's stabilizing. And of course I've got a lot of time for Bungo Musa Makatini, who is one of the few independent chairpersons the SABC has ever had. And no surprises that the current Minister of Communication wanted to get rid of him. Didn't speak to him for 8 months. Squeezed him, tried to make sure that the SABC doesn't get funding. It's just a horror story. The current Minister of Communication is a disaster. Disaster waiting to happen. No wonder the government took away government communications from her and said, no, let rather Jackson Tembu speak. Disaster. You can't describe her any other way. How does a Minister of Communication put her hand over a camera of a TV to say, don't cover this? Yet, she still kept her job and actually was reappointed. But why are you surprised? In South Africa, if you want to be promoted, just mess up. You promoted. Look at Kulwani. Stuffs up with a Gupta landing and gets promoted to be an ambassador. Anyway, that's not what I want to talk about. Let's take a look at what we had to say yesterday about the taxes and what the minister said today. One of the things that irritated me 2 years ago, I think it was what one can call the lack of ideas, almost the evaporation of ideas when it comes to how to deal with our national debt. And what was the shortcut? Just increase VAT. Make VAT 15%. We were suggesting here, Minister, reduce VAT back to 14%. It was a shortcut solution to increase. I'm not aware that any of the finance ministers since Malusi Gaba have told us what that 1% additional VAT has done for our economy. So keep it at 14%. Make sure the poor do not continue to suffer.
To support growth, therefore, we propose no major tax increases. I don't know where people who talked about VAT increase got that from.
I hope he was not referring to us. He can't possibly be referring to us at all, because he doesn't watch TV, he said, isn't it? Anyway, we talked about state-owned enterprises. Of course, the whole issue, the fear that the SOEs will always come with a begging bowl to the fiscus. bothers a lot of South Africans. Let's take a look. The second thing that has irritated society is what I can call the begging bowl mentality of state-owned enterprises. How long must we keep this burden on the public? How long should we tolerate a simply non-performing asset like South African Airways? We can't even count how many billions SAA has come begging. In any normal situation, you cannot continue to do the same thing and expect different results. So what should happen with SAA? Appoint an equity partner immediately.
The South African Airways sword of Damocles has fallen on us. SAA has been placed under business rescue, which will lead to a radically restructured airline. Over the medium term, government has allocated 16.4 billion rand to settle guaranteed debt and interest. The associated restructuring costs will be reprioritized within the budget. It is the very sincere hope of many that this intervention will lead to a sustainable airline that is not a burden to the fiscus.
Well, it's a burden if you're talking 16 billion rand being pumped into something that's failing. That's clearly a burden. I don't know what Bowen is talking about. I think he was being sarcastic, really. He's saying this thing won't be a burden, but anyway, let's just give them 16 billion, just for good measure. I'm devastated. I thought the minister was going to announce how indeed that 16 billion is not going to go to waste, and also talk about the equity partner. It has now disappeared from the lexicon. Nobody is talking about it. Anyway, I also talked yesterday about Umdend. Apparently now we are headed for 19 million. You're using 17 million as an outdated number of people who are dependent on social grants. We are headed for 19 million people, man, on social grants. I suggested that the youngsters must be taken off those social grants. They must be taken into employment, and development and empowerment programs so that they can earn that money. But of course, the minister thought, let's just put 80 rand and keep the oldies happy. Let's take a look. Increase the welfare grants of people who deserve it. We heard just earlier on News at Prime, the old lady who was telling us how useless the current amounts of social grants are for those who are indeed impoverished, those who are indigent. Why don't you increase that properly by 25%? Give us 2 rand increase. What do I want to do with 2 rand? Do they even still print 2 rand at the mint? What for?
Grants reduce inequality and protect the most vulnerable in our society. I'm happy to announce that grants are adjusted as follows. Firstly, 80 rand increase for old age, disability and care dependency, which goes up to 1,860 per month. 80 rand increase in the War Veterans Grant to 1,880 rand. 40 rand increase for the foster care grant to 1,040 rand per month. The child support grant will increase by 20 rand to 445 per month.
And we work up passionate at 40 rand. And about Papa, but woman is a big thing, but it's increased by 40 rand. Now, in a context of 60 billion rand being wasted by municipalities, if 40 billion rand being wasted, by the government departments, just on wasteful expenditure alone, you're talking about 100 billion rand being wasted. How can we have a situation where parliamentarians who are supposed to be representing the people are clapping for 80 rand? And they think, hey, let me work 40 rand. It's like he's announcing 400 rand. Hey, but anyway, what can we say? We must be thankful for small mercies. What are we talking to a range of people tonight? To ask the question, is this budget cycle a realistic path that can take the economy somewhere else? I would like to know, in terms of all of the things that were said tonight, what is it there that gives us hope that the economy is going to be stimulated. Maybe it's a good thing that taxes were not increased. But I still want to understand from our guest tonight, why is it that there is a reluctance to increase corporate tax? Corporates have had it very nice, right? 28% for the longest time, right? And of course, as I was saying yesterday, the poor have had to suffer. They've had to have their VAT increased. They've had to have their taxes being at a staggering 45%. That literally means half of what you're making, you must give back to the fiscal. So tonight's dialogue is to not only look at the budget as an instrument of change, but also to look at the trajectory of our economy, to start asking the hard questions. How have we run out of ideas to move our growth path of our economy from this zero-sum game of 0%, I don't know what it is now, 0.7%, to something solid? This economy is not alien to growing at rates of 3, 4, or 5%. Right? What needs to change in our society, in our policy landscape, to make sure that we can go back to a situation where, in fact, we can talk about some economic growth? The issue of unemployment is a very big issue for everybody. Right? A country of our size with some almost 30% unemployment rate is indeed a bomb, a time bomb waiting to go off. 55%, poverty. Is there anything in this budget that shows that there is a level of consciousness that amongst our leaders that in fact 55% of this population lives under the breadline? Is there anything? I was asking the experts who have watched the budget, who have a lot to say about the economy, to give me their own views about whether this economy is going anywhere and what are the drastic things that will happen. I don't think there was anything drastic in the budget that could, for example, be labeled radical economic transformation. What is it there that was radical? Honestly, is it because there is a disjuncture between maybe what the ANC decides, right, and what actually people who are its deployees in government do once they have the levers of power, once they've got sway and influence, once they can make decisions that can take our people out of abject poverty? That's our budget tonight, South Africa. You, of course, can continue throughout the show to give us a ring. And if you want to share of your own views, you can send us WhatsApps on an ongoing basis. You can also tweet us at Tabane at Newsroom 405. Let's take a break. After the break, at the bottom of this hour, our budget dialogue commences here on Newsroom Africa. And of course, later on, Africa Roundtable with Advocate Mandula to round off the night. Let's take a break now.